Yes, my dear sons and daughters, we are going to discuss together the last scene in King Lear. And we are going to cover from page 21 to page 24. So we are going to cover 3 pages, 22, 23, 24. You have before you on the screen the first question: why did Caius travel to France? Why did Caius travel to France? The error of Kent's faithfulness now showed itself more clearly than it had ever done before. With the help of some of the king's soldiers, he had the king taken to the castle at Dover. So the king was taken and was put in a castle at Dover, where most of his own friends were. Kent himself set sail for France. So I am going to start answering question number 1 on the screen. Kent himself set sail for France, where he hurried to Cordelia. He told her of her father's pitiful condition and how it had been caused by the cruelty of her sisters. This loving child begged her husband to let her go to England with an army big enough to defeat these cruel daughters and their husbands. The king of France, agreed to this, so she set out with the royal army and landed at Dover. So the answer of question number 1 before you, the heir of Kent or Caius traveled to France to tell Cordelia what had happened to her father because of his 2 daughters, Goneril and Regan. Let's move to another part, which is part 2 in the same page, page 22. Lear had escaped from the care of the soldiers in whose charge Kent had left him. He was found by some of Cordelia's soldiers. So I'm going to start answering question number 2 on the screen. In what condition was King Lear found? Wandering about, underline with me, wandering about the fields near Dover in a sad condition. In a sad condition. He was quite mad. He was quite mad, and singing aloud to himself with a crown on his head, which he had made of grass and other wild plants that he had picked up in the cornfields. So King Lear, when he was found, he was singing to himself. And he was wearing a crown made of grass. And he was talking to himself, singing aloud to himself. Yes, let's carry on. He was quite mad and singing aloud to himself with a crown on his head, which he had made of grass and other wild plants that he had picked up in the cornfields. Cordelia greatly desired to see her father, but the doctors persuaded her to delay the meeting until sleep and medicine had made him better, So Cordelia brought with her some skillful doctors from France to treat her father. She wanted to meet her father, but the doctors refused because they did not want the daughter to see her father in such a bad condition. She asked them to meet him very soon, but they refused and told her that to wait until sleep and medicine had made him better. With the help of these skillful men, to whom Cordelia promised all her gold and jewels, if they helped her father back to good health. So Cordelia promised the doctors, in case they helped her father to recover, they would give them all her jewels, all her gold, back to good health. Lear was soon in a condition to see his daughter. Okay, let's move to the third part. I prepared for you a question, which is number 3 on the screen before you. This describes the meeting between Cordelia and her father. It was a very impressive meeting. It was a moving sight to see the meeting between the father and the daughter. Lear was torn between joy at seeing his child again and his shame at receiving such kindness from the daughter he had sent away in his foolish pride and anger. His half-made brain sometimes made him unable to remember where he was, or who it was that cast him so kindly. Then he would beg those who were with him not to laugh at him, if he were mistaken in thinking this lady to be his daughter Cordelia. So King Lear was torn between joy and sadness. Joy because he saw his beloved daughter again, Cordelia, and sadness because he deprived her from her inheritance. He deprived her from his wealth. He fell on his knees. King Lear fell on his knees to ask his daughter's forgiveness, but she, good lady, told him it was not as suitable for him to do. She was only doing her duty. She was only doing her duty as she was his child. She cast him, as she said, to cast away all her sister's unkindness, and says that they ought to be ashamed of themselves. She told her father that her two sisters, Goneril and Regan, ought to be ashamed of themselves for turning their kind old father with his white beard out into the cold air. She would not have turned away her enemy's dog on a night like that, even if it had bitten her. It could have stayed by her fire and warmed itself. Cordelia told her father that he had come from France to help him. He asked her to forgive and forget. So King Lear asked Cordelia to forgive him and forget what he had done to her. Since he was an old man and a foolish one, and he did not know what he was doing. She certainly had good reason not to love him, but her sister had no excuse. To this, Cordelia replied that she had no cause, and neither had they, We can leave this old king in the care of his loving child. With the help of sleep and medicine, she and her doctors at last succeeded in bringing some peace to that troubled mind, which was so upset by the cruelty of his other daughters. Let us now go back to say a word or two about them. Let's move to the next part. The two daughters, Goneril and Regan, were unfaithful to their husbands. Their husbands explained. The ungrateful creatures who had been so false to their own father could not be expected to be more faithful to their husbands. They soon grew tired of showing even the appearance of love and duty, and made it clear that they had given their love to another man. So because the two daughters, Goneril and Regan, were unfaithful to their father, they were unfaithful to their husbands as well, because although they were married, they fell in love with a gentleman called Edmund, although they were married. It was Edmund, a natural son of the dead heir of Gloucester. By his evil actions, he had removed his brother Edgar, the lawful heir, from his position, and was now Earl himself. Let's move to the next slide. At about this time, the Duke of Cornwall, Regan's husband, died. Regan at once announced her intention, her desire, her plan of marrying this heir of Gloucester. So Regan's husband died. So Regan declared that she was planning to marry Edmund. This excited the jealousy of her sister, to whom the evil Earl had spoken of his love. And Goneril killed, underline with me, killed Regan by giving her poison. By giving her poison. So how did Regan die? Goneril killed her by giving her poison. But Goneril's husband discovered that she had done and put her in prison. So Goneril was put in prison by her husband because she killed her sister for the sake of a man, where she soon put an end to her own life. So Goneril killed herself in prison because she thought that she lost everything. She lost her father and she lost her husband, so she committed suicide in prison. In this way, the justice of heaven at last claimed these ungrateful daughters. Ungrateful daughters. So you have a question before you. The play had a tragic end. Explain. So every one of the play had a tragic end. Most of the characters had a tragic end. Regan was killed by Goneril. Goneril killed herself in a prison. And let's know the rest of the characters. But a sad end was waiting for Cordelia, whose kindness seemed to deserve better fortune. The armies which Goneril and Regan had sent out under the command of Edmund, the bad heir of Gloucester, were successful. So Edmund, who was leading the armies of Goneril and Regan, defeated Cordelia's army. They caught Cordelia, so Cordelia was caught, was captured, and she was put in a prison, and she was killed there. Again, Cordelia was captured in one of the battles and was put in a prison, and in a prison she was killed. Lear did not live long after his sweet child death. Yes, even King Lear himself, because of his grief on the death of Cordelia, he did not live long. He died with a broken heart. He died with a broken heart. Before the king died, the good Earl of Kent tried to tell him that it was he who had followed him under the name of Caius. Lear's troubled mind could not understand how that could be, or how Kent and Caius could be the same person. So Caius wanted to explain to the king that he was the Earl of Kent. And the Earl of Kent and Caius are one person. The king could not recognize, could not understand how two men are just one man. Lear could not understand that it is that how Kent and Caius could be the same person. So Kent thought it unnecessary to try to explain. This faithful servant to the king died of grief soon after his master. So the end of the Earl of Kent or Caius, he died too, because of his grief and sorrow on the king. There is no need here to tell how the bad Earl of Gloucester was killed in a fight with his brother. It means Edmund, who played love on Goneril and Regan. He was killed by his brother Edgar, and Edgar became again the Duke of Gloucester in a fight with his brother. And how Goneril's husband, the Duke of Albany, who had never encouraged his lady in her bad ways, became the King of England. So Goneril's husband, the Duke of Albany, became the King of England. Lear and his three daughters were dead, and our story ends with them. Okay, my dear sons and daughters, this is the end of the play King Lear. I have just discussed with you the last scene. I wish I had explained well. I wish I had delivered my message very well. Thank you for good listening.